Hey Emma,
Yes, Mel.
where do middle schoolers go to buy their outfits that they wear when they play ultraviolent games?
I don't know. Where do they go?
Aero Postal. Hello and welcome to Talk This.
It's dangerous to podcast alone.
I'm your, I don't think I've ever shot at Aero Postal host Madelyn.
I'm your... Does Aeropostale still exist anymore? Host Emma.
I think they do. I think because I've definitely heard people be like, they're better now.
Okay.
They don't smell. Oh, I've heard Abercrombie doesn't smell quite as bad.
Abercrombie's different from Aeropostale.
I know it is, but I think of the two as sort of
The one and the same.
two halves of the same coin.
Got it.
Anyway, thanks for tuning into the show. This week, in our post-Thanksgiving turkey slumber, post-Black Friday, pre-Cyber Monday episode, we're talking about Postal, and we're talking about Saltsea Chronicles. Two games with very different perspectives, I think,
Yes.
on our current world.
You really will have to hold on in the middle of the episode because we will be swinging across various spectrums, I feel like.
Just like every possible.
Many of them.
Yeah. So let's start with Postal. Let's start dark. It's a Postal. It's a 1997 top-down shooter from Running with Scissors, which came out for computers. Has a bunch of sequels. Postal 2 in 2003, Postal 3 in 2011, and most recently Postal 4, No Regrets,
Yes.
in 2022.
And some various remakes and spin-offs and stuff as well.
Yeah. So in Postal, in all of the Postals, actually, you play as the Postal Dude. In the original one, the original one is apparently a little bit different in tone than the other ones, sort of.
There's, like, less happening in the first one
Yeah.
in general.
Yeah.
So,
They haven't quite settled on, like, they've settled on edgelord,
yes.
but not, like, edgelord humor
yes.
in the first one.
One of the things I read was, like, the, like, content, like, the things the postal guy says, the things you can read in, like, the in-game journal stuff, and, like, the narration that happens in between, like, chapters all feel like very different tones.
Mm.
And they don't really, doesn't feel like they talk to each other
Mhm.
when writing these different things, because some of them, like, there's multiple different narratives going on, there's multiple different tones going on, that creates sort of a confused experience, mostly, in the first one.
So in the first one, right, you play as the Postal Dude, you've been evicted, and you think that the Air Force is in the process of releasing a plague on your hometown of Paradise, and you're the only one who's immune to this, like, respiratory plague. And so your response to that is, well, I've got to go and shoot up the Air Force Base, and a lot of people on my way there. So, like, obviously, like, I do think the game, like, you know, hopefully from the beginning, pretty obvious depiction of, like, something's not right here with this guy. But yeah, I mean, it's a two-stick shooter, isometric shooter.
Mm-hmm.
So you just go around killing a bunch of NPCs. Goal is not to get to the exit. Goal is to kill a bunch of NPCs.
Yes,
in each
to
level.
move on to the next one, you have to kill a certain amount of hostiles in each section, essentially.
Yeah.
Because it's not like there are things that have been inspired by Postal that are, like, really more like you're just shooting civilians.
Yeah.
But in Postal, everybody does seem to have, like, a rocket launcher and will shoot back at you.
Yeah.
For most of the game, so there's
Which
that.
does undermine a little bit the, like, this whole Air Force thing probably was all in your head. Like, just a little.
Well, again, there's a whole book on Postal, like a short book, like a little essay thing, from Boss Fight Books that was under $5, so I bought it and skimmed through it.
Mm-hmm.
Like, in playing it, the person writing it, like, they were playing it for sort of they played it once when they were 12 and severely traumatized an extremely Christian neighbor a friend that they had in the process, and then hadn't played it again, so they were playing it through for the first time. And they're like reading like the in-game text versus like seeing what's on screen. For most of the game, it's hard to determine whether like you think you're the one true savior or if you actually are like the one true savior of this town.
Yeah. And then, spoilers, I guess. Again, this game is coming up on, it's 25 years old. It's more than 25 years old. So some spoilers for this, like, 3-hour game.
And again, like, especially the first one, it's not very in your face about this plot.
Yeah. But at the end, you get captured. But only sort of after... it was hard for me to tell exactly which order this happens.
The last level... So they changed this in the remake. They changed the last level.
Bear in mind, right? Postal originally released in 1997.
Yes.
Which will be relevant.
So you've been going through... People have been fighting back at you. And then there's, like, a title card that, again, I read this book and the person got up and was like, no! No! That's like, it just usually tells you what location you're in at the title card, and this one was like, the elementary school. Which, yeah. You're not actually in control for this level, it's just a cutscene that happens, and then it sort of fades to, like an asylum sort of narration thing that suggests that this guy just had, like, he went to Postal.
Which the USPS did not love, by the way.
Incredibly funny.
We'll come back to that.
Incredibly funny, that whole lawsuit. That's funnier than like almost
that
anything in the
funny,
games.
Actually, the lawsuit.
So that was the original ending.
To be clear, at the elementary school, your weapon doesn't actually work. There's no actual slaughter that takes place at the elementary school on screen.
Yes.
So, small, you know.
In the remake, in Redux, they replaced this level with you end up at a church. You can't get inside the church. You go around back where there's a funeral going on. You're actually in control for this part rather than it being like a cutscene. You can try to shoot people that are there. Go up and will work on them. You approach a funeral. You see it's your funeral. And then it cuts to the, like, asylum bit. Which, like, not a very original ending, but I think probably stronger for, like, in many ways. Just a better thing in many ways.
Like, I will say, if you were going to take it totally in abstract from the world that we live in, that, like...
You can't, though.
You can't. I mean, you can't. Right?
But it's almost not worth...
No, I know.
Doing that.
I know. You're right, of course. If this was a game that was better.
Sure, if this was a game that was better.
Yeah.
It's not like you... I'm not trying to say, like, oh, like, there are things you can never do, but Postal is not a very good game in any sense.
Yeah.
So, like, you get to that point, you see the title card, the elementary school, and you're like, wow, no... You've done nothing to earn that.
Well, and they said, so again, you know, the tiny amount of context here, right, of like this being released in 1997, 2 years pre-Columbine. I did do a little bit of research on this, by the way. I was like, okay, like Columbine, right? But like, what about before that? And there actually aren't that many, school shootings like we have grown accustomed to now before that, genuinely. So I don't really believe it when they say in the release of the most recent remake of like, oh, we included this because it was like so absurd and like beyond the realm of possibility and like pure shock value. It's like, I don't really believe that even in 1997 we lived in that world.
Yeah.
But like, okay, like I can buy 20% of that. Which was the rationale that they give for taking it out. Not like, oh, we've been censored.
Yeah.
Right? But this doesn't have the impact that we want it to have anymore. Good. This is not necessarily a developer that I would have said, yes, they're going to get rid of their controversial ending here.
Yeah.
So, Good for them. But yeah, I did read that and I was like, oh my god. And then I, decapitalized one of those when I saw it was 1997, but still.
Yeah.
Oh my god. Anyway, that's Postal. The first one got okay reviews. There were enough people who were like, there's something interesting here.
Well, I think sort of somewhat characteristically of 90s reviews, a lot of them were more like, it's not very fun.
Yeah.
It's not very fun to play, so,
Yeah.
Which it did not seem to be.
Yeah.
They're very bullet spongy enemies. There's some bad, enemy AI is not that interesting. It's just not a very great game.
If we're selling you on it, it's free everywhere. You can download the original Postal for free and try it for yourself. Not if you've got a Mac running on a modern iOS.
Alas.
But if you have a PC, you can download the original one for free.
Yeah.
And the source code, if you want to make your own Postal. It was described, I did like this. So this did come out sort of around the, game panic time.
Yes, I think that's partially why it has actually endured in public consciousness more than anything about the game itself.
Yeah, so thank you, shout out to Senator Joe Lieberman for describing it as one of the 3 worst things in American society at the time, along with Marilyn Manson, sure, and Calvin Klein underwear ads. Didn't really win that battle.
Oh, Joe Lieberman. What a guy.
What a thing to be like, this game, this one game.
Yeah.
I don't think senators now could name a video game. So...
Well, no, I mean, in the 90s, the fear of violent video games was more like the fear of comics and whatever new media happened to be at the time, right? Whereas now it's just like the NRA is like, say video games. And that's it.
Yeah.
That's all I have to say about it.
Yeah. I just thought it was funny. I was like, this is like a game, this is like a cult classic kind of game. Cult classic maybe even oversells it a little bit. And have it be like, no, a senator said it was like one of the worst things in America.
Yes.
They must have popped champagne.
Yes.
At the office.
Running with Scissors is definitely the sort of company that is very gleeful about its controversial status, being disliked even, just reading about them, they're very much just the pinnacle of it's just a joke, bro, you know, of that sort of person, of very claiming to be equal opportunists, sort of South Parkian, but without even the module of the intelligence that happens that is sometimes in South Park.
Right.
I don't really like South Park either, but there's
those
something
guys
there.
have brains. They just choose not to use them or choose to use them for ill.
Yes.
Anyway, believe it or not, it's so funny because I don't even think of going postal as being connected to anything real. It's just like a phrase.
Yeah.
Right? We don't always, I don't know. Recently I've been like, let's look up the meaning of this. Let's look up the meaning of that.
Yeah.
All the time. But I don't think of going postal as connected to anything like the post office.
Right.
But it is. Apparently post office workers committed a lot of workplace murder in the 80s and 90s. Mm-hmm. Who would have thought?
It seems like it was just sort of a coincidental thing.
I know.
A couple of post office workers happened to do some murders pretty close to each other. Newspapers started using going postal. It sort of gradually evolved into just workplace sort of murder in general. Saying it like an edgier version of I wish it was Friday.
An edgier version of that,
yeah. And then it's just sort of, now you can just sort of use it for anything.
Yeah, losing your mind in any way.
Yeah.
But yeah, I sort of knew this. This is one of those facts that gets re-upped in my mind every 5 years or so. But it was interesting reminder as we enter this holiday season.
Yes. Apparently they do have framed in their office the letter sent to them by the U.S. Postmaster General. Is that what he's called?
Yes, good for them. There's a lot of edgelord stuff here, right? But, yes, do frame the letter from the Postmaster General. That I support.
Sent them a letter saying, this is not what the men and women of the Postal Service stand for. And it's he's not even a postal worker. Right? Yeah. There's no postal references.
It's just a reference to the phrase.
Yeah. And there were, even after this Postmaster General retired and died, the lawsuit was still going on. It went on 7 years until they dropped it. And one of their arguments was well, maybe we'll go into video games.
Yeah, I saw that.
Which, incredibly funny.
Amazing. I hope so. I'd love to see USPS drop some hot games.
You know what? Why not?
Yeah. They would have to with PlayStation.
Yeah, sure.
USPS.
Right. Right. Very funny.
I thought it was natural. Anyway. I actually think that most people sort of consider Postal 2 to be the Postal.
Yes.
Postal.
Yeah.
Which came out, like I said, in 2003. It actually becomes a first-person shooter. This one was top-down, guys. This one's FPS. And it's open world. You're the postal dude. This time you have a wife.
Yes.
It does not really seem to follow the events of Postal 1.
No, it does not.
All of the other ones do exist in a chronology, but this one does not. The Postal 1 is sort of its own thing. Postal 1 also had a bunch of, re-releases. Had, Japan exclusive levels, which is just crazy.
Yeah.
It's weird. It's that, regional exclusive stuff, such a thing of the past. No, so, yeah. Anyway, in Postal 2, you play a week in the life of Postal Dude, and it's no longer, this, grand conspiracy, I have to go destroy the Air Force sort of situation. Instead, it's I have to go get milk.
Yes. Your wife sends you on errands each day, and it just happens that the town you live in is incredibly violent.
Now, notably, I don't know if you can do, a full no-violence run of Postal 2. I suspect you cannot. But the tagline of the game was, it's only as violent as you are. Which is to say, you can make the choice to just, go and wait in line for Gary Coleman's autograph.
Mm-hmm.
Right? You don't actually have to murder people to, get your groceries. It's just that most people will, because it's a game. So there is a pacifist route.
I think it's probably a self-defense route, if anything.
Fair enough. A self-defense route, still. Anyway, this one ends with the apocalypse, and also an ambiguous, did you murder your wife or did she murder you moment at the end of the game, which great. Sure. We love that.
Yeah.
We love some ambiguous wife murder.
She becomes a ninja in the fourth one.
Does she really?
Yeah.
Good for her. Good for her. Fun fact, I don't know if this is still true, but for a while at least, it was actually illegal to even own this game in New Zealand.
Yep. New Zealand and Australia are very stringent, though.
Yeah.
So.
I just thought, it being, it's one thing to be you're not going to sell this. It's another whole other level to be you can't even own this.
Yeah, that's true.
It's not just it can't be on storefronts. It's if we find this in your home, you're going to jail.
Yeah.
That's an exaggeration, I think. You're paying a fine.
Yeah.
But it's wild because I actually, I honestly feel you could probably look at this and it's, not that bad compared to, horrible on, every axis.
Right.
But, violence-wise, probably not that bad compared to now.
Yes, I think I would agree.
Mortal Kombat. Highly realistic Mortal Kombat.
Portal 3 was actually made by...
Postal 3.
I'm sorry.
Portal 3, we still await.
Postal 3 was actually made by a different developer. It's sort of a joke now among the developer, the Running with Scissors, that Postal 3 sucks and you shouldn't buy it.
Yeah.
And then Postal 4 just came out and was also bad because
was Metacritic's worst reviewed game of 2022.
It really just seems like they haven't really, like, it was very shocking when it came out in 1997, and they just haven't progressed past that at all. I mean, they're using the tagline "No regrets," which, like, how freaking old is that?
Yeah,
like it shows that you just like aren't freshening up your act very well, which I feel like is just like when you're going with like the everybody's a target sort of thing. Whoa, get the protesters and also us, the developers, or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
I just think that sort of humor is pretty stagnant.
Yeah, your satire's got to be a little sharper.
Yes.
You can buy, I almost said Portal 3, too. Postal 3 now. For a while, they had taken it down.
Yeah.
Because they were like, no.
Yeah.
This is terrible. They outsourced it to this, like, Russian developer, basically, that they thought was going to have more bandwidth, but then the financial crisis hit, and they did a bad job.
Boss Fight books, the book on it was like 150 pages. It was really interesting. Went through the game and the movie, had interviews.
Oh, I'm excited to talk about the movie.
It had interviews with the two main guys from Running with Scissors. He went to to Vince, whatever his name's house for an evening and chatted with him. Apparently they're very popular in Russia.
Sure.
They go there, everybody's like, wow, we love Postal.
Okay.
So
great. That's fine, whatever. Like, it's whatever. But yeah, they delisted it because they hated it, and then that developer relisted it on Steam, but apparently it was totally unplayable because the DRM was messed up.
Right.
And so Steam took it down. But now, like, just this fall, it's back up. You can buy Postal 3. It's $1.50.
Good.
So, I'm like, I wouldn't buy it. But
no.
There's part of me that's like, wow, how bad could this be?
Yeah.
But they did, it was so bad that they released a DLC in 2015 for Postal 2.
Yeah.
Which, remember, released in 2003.
Well, there had been, like, an area in Postal 2 that had been closed off since release and said it was opening. I guess they had been updating it before this, but there was a particular area that said it was opening in, like, 2016. And they did, in fact, open it in 2016. It was mostly, like, an ad for, like, the Postal remake, I think. But
they did weird. That to, like, retcon. They also used it to, like, totally retcon 3.
Yeah.
They were like, he was in a coma. None of that happened.
Yes.
Just very, like, Community Season 5.
Yeah.
Anyway, let's talk about the movie. Wow. Incredible. Where to begin? 2007 film adaptation from, and I really meant to look up how to pronounce this guy's first name, and I did. I didn't have my headphones. I didn't want to, like, play it out loud. I think it's Yue Bol, who is known for making just terrifically bad video game movie adaptations. For context, I loved these two quotes about other projects that he was pursuing. He wanted to work on the Metal Gear movie. And Hideo Kojima said, it's impossible that we'd ever do a movie with him. And then he wanted to do the Warcraft movie, and Blizzard said, we will not sell the movie rights, not to you, especially not to you. It's just, like, killer stuff. Framed those quotes, too.
Yeah. Again, they had a profile on Bull in this book, too, and, like, he's not quite the same type of person as the Running with Scissors guy, in that I think he has less of a, like, everything's a joke mentality.
Yeah.
So...
No, he does seem to take it quite seriously.
Yeah.
Which, like, yikes. Anyway, if you missed hit 2007 film Postal, let me give you a taste. It starts off on 9/11.
Yep.
In the cockpit.
Yep.
And Osama bin Laden on the phone. And, like, that's the taste. It ends with Osama bin Laden and George W. Bush frolicking through a field as bombs drop. And in between the postal guys there.
You know what? There's something there in that last image. I feel like.
Like, I guess. But is there? When Osama bin Laden is played by the soup Nazi from Seinfeld,
yeah.
Is there? How is J.K. Simmons in this, by the way? What's he doing here?
That was one thing. I really skimmed, like, the film section
Yeah.
in the Boss Fight Books thing. But what I did read was really fascinating. Of, like, he always somehow gets, like...
Tricks one guy into being in it.
Gets some major actors to be in it somehow. Yeah. It's sort of incredible. But the profile was very much like, it's kind of a good bad movie. In this person's opinion, or like an interesting bad movie.
Okay.
They were generally like, his approach to filmmaking is very like sincere in himself, right? And that can be interesting. Mm-hmm. But yeah, it is a bit of a... I mean, at the same time, in a lot of ways, I read also, like, you know, there's a little Kotaku podcast with one of the authors of this book, which is how I found it, on, like, how this film got made, of, like, you know, low-level sort of licenses can just be bought for pretty cheap.
Yeah.
Which is how he got stuff like Alone in the Dark and all this other sort of, like, low-level franchises that had fans that would come go see it and be angry and still, but it would get attention, right?
Yeah.
But I don't forget where I was going with this. What was I saying?
It was interesting regardless.
Okay.
Well,
I was gonna say, like, it's kind of I saw in the comments people being like, well, it's kind of a good adaptation of Postal.
Sure. Yeah.
Was one take.
Right.
So there's that.
It's just, you know, sometimes some things just shouldn't be adapted. It did gross less than 1% of its budget, which, to be fair, is probably a consequence of how few movies theaters were willing to play it.
But see.
Oh.
The reason Boll could keep making movies like this is because of a German tax law.
Oh.
Where you would get, like, money back if your movie did not do well.
Is this the same tax law that is, like... I know they are releasing the Wile E. Coyote movie. Is this the German equivalent?
I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't fully understand how it works, but essentially it was just like a thing.
In German tax law?
It was essentially just a thing. If you used correctly, you could make money whether or not your film made a profit.
Gotcha. That makes a lot more sense then.
Yeah.
Anyway, it played on, like, at its best, 20 screens in the U.S. Understandably, theater distributors were like, I don't know about this movie that starts off with a scene that makes very light of the 9/11 attacks.
Yes.
And features a lot of Osama bin Laden and a lot of murder.
Yeah.
Like, we maybe don't want to show that.
Yeah.
He was pissed about it. And he was man, like, did you see the stuff that he said to the Wired reviewer? Astonishingly vile things to say to a reviewer. Mm-hmm. The Wired review was, like, very bad, and he was pissed because apparently that reviewer had said to his face that they liked the movie, mm-hmm. and then they wrote an honest review. Mm-hmm. And yeah, just a lot of, like, nasty things.
Yeah.
It's like, this is not a nice man. Which makes sense, because he's adapting... like, you couldn't be a nice man and want to adapt Postal into a movie, I think. Yeah.
We have to move on.
Yes, we do.
I do want to share just one other tidbit, that Running with Scissors is a branch off of a different company that was originally where these guys were working, all the people at Running with Scissors, that did children's entertainment.
Right, they did. Oh, what did they do?
Like Sesame Street.
Like Willy the Whale or something.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He has like
Free Willy.
One thing was like he went out and was like, I got an award from the government for my outstanding educational program thing. He went in the book. He was like, look at my award for how much good I've done for children, which incredibly funny. Again,
the dichotomy. Speaking of a dichotomy, Saltsea Chronicles.
Yes.
Let's go the other direction now. We didn't even get to talk about how these guys were a little gamergatey.
Yes, they are a little gamergatey.
Like, not so gamer. They've deleted the blogs, so I couldn't...
They're very, they seem to be very on message of, like, it's, you know, it's about ethics.
It's about ethics and
we
games
don't
journalism.
condone all the other stuff that happened.
Yeah.
So, there's that.
Yeah. Anyway. Saltsea Chronicles. Saltsea Chronicles does not even seem to have a Wikipedia page.
Nope.
That always makes it hard for me. That's my traditional starting point.
It came out this October from Danish developer. What is their name again? Die
Gut Fabrik.
Die Gut Fabrik.
Sure, that's not pronounced correctly.
I don't think it's that off. Which is a sort of adventure game where you play as a crew that's sort of sailing around to different islands. At the beginning, your captain has gone missing. So you're sort of sailing around trying to figure out what happened, as well as continuing to do your job of, like, exploring these and understanding these different communities that you happen across.
And it's an adventure game that definitely leans heavily toward the visual novel side of adventure game.
There is a fun card game in it, apparently, though.
All games, like Gwent, I feel like, has really stamped a mark on games.
I read an article that was literally like, my partner was really into Gwent, and I didn't get it. Yeah. And then I played the card game in Saltsea Chronicle and was like, okay, heck yeah.
I saw someone, like, there was, like, the game in Cult of the Lamb, too, which I also didn't super care. I was like, this is fine.
Mm-hmm.
But I do feel like the in-game card game, understandably, is a big thing.
Absolutely.
The merch opportunity there alone.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I do think the one in Saltsea Chronicles just used with a normal deck of cards.
Doesn't mean you couldn't sell some.
You could theoretically play it with whatever deck of cards you happen to have around too, which was one of the appeals for the person writing this article.
Right. But if I were them, I'd be working on a branded card deck ASAP.
Sure.
Yeah. So it's like a lot. Somebody called it like choose your own adventure style.
Mm-hmm.
Which is, like, sort of right, except I think of Choose Your Own Adventure Hallmark as being like, and then you died.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
Like, and then you died.
Go back.
Yeah.
Stupid.
Turn back to page whatever and start over. So Choose Your Own Adventure. It does, like, in the sense of, like, it's a lot more binary choices, although Choose Your Own Adventure sometimes has more than two choices.
Yeah.
I can see it. But yeah, you can play it on not Xbox, but everything else. Which it feels like it's funny. Because, like, this doesn't feel like an Xbox game in the, like, old sense of that.
I guess so.
In the, like, 2 generations ago sense. Like, Postal is, like, that's an Xbox game.
I guess
even though you can't play it on Xbox either. This is my, like, Xbox 360 era understanding of what comes out on each console.
Sure.
So, PlayStation supremacy. But it's a very, I don't want to call it, like, wholesome, right? Like, I don't mean that in a derogatory way.
Yeah.
But I mean that in a, like, there's a lot of care that seems to have gone into all elements of development, and there's a lot of care that is involved in the storytelling as well.
Yeah, so there's a good game developer article that goes into it where they talk about, like, in their previous game, which I played last year, Muta Zion, at some point late in development, they had, like, a conversation of, like, oh, maybe we should have made this so that you're playing, like, various different members of this community rather than just the one protagonist.
Right. Because it's a game that's sort of about community.
Yes, it's about getting to know the community and each of the characters being important, having their own lives going on, but you're sort of locked in one person's perspective in that game. But of course, by the time they're talking about that, they're like, this is the game we're making, right? We're not pivoting back to change our approach to this. But they took that idea and sort of carried it forward into this game and tried to make a game where you're really playing not as like a particular character, but as this crew, as a totality. So each chapter may have like sort of a focus character, but you're still not always only playing that character in that chapter. They're just like the person that's sort of required to go on the exhibition out to the island that chapter.
Yeah. So the way the game is structured is it has 12 episodes. And from what I understand, right, this is not a multiple endings game.
Yes.
So if I said visual novel and you heard, yes, who will I end up with? Not that kind of visual novel. But it is a game where you can sort of like chart your own path within the story. Which I do appreciate places being more upfront about. Like early days of the podcast, I feel like I was so upset about Tales from the Borderlands or whatever.
Right.
And I appreciate that like we're like talking about that now and that like design strategy and how you still implement player agency and that sort of thing without it always having to be like, and there's multiple endings.
Yeah.
But there's 12 episodes and each one basically, I think except for like the first and last, which are quite similar, regardless.
Yeah.
Is that you have like some options for islands to visit, and the way they've structured it, so it's not like there's like 10 crew members, right? So you can imagine if at every island you got to pick 2 of those crew members to go with you, they'd have to have, well, it's like Fire Emblem, right?
Yeah.
It's like you'd have to have 90 possible permutations of it. No, 45 possible permutations of it, which is not possible.
Yes.
Right, that's crazy. So instead what they did was like, okay, like we've got these islands, and each one is like a genre, right, which I thought was a sort of a interesting way of thinking about how do we keep them distinct. And each one has someone who has to go. And you've got like 4 other choices for people who can go with them. And so the person who goes with them impacts the story quite a lot, obviously. But it doesn't end up as this like total mush of like the developers no longer have any control over the story they're telling.
Yes.
Because you can bring any 2 people on the ship. So I thought that was like both clever and explained in a cool way in the game developer article. I think I read that one as well. Because, like, I always think about that. It's like, oh, it's cool to get to bring whoever, or it's cool to get supports with different people, or be able to recruit people or not. Right? It's not all relevant to this game, but now I'm talking about Fire Emblem. But then it starts to get, like, mushy when it's like, oh, we have no idea who the player is bringing.
Yeah.
And even here, sometimes it seemed like there were some reviews where it was like, I brought someone, and, like, they didn't quite jive with the themes of the island, and so like the story didn't feel like it got fully explored. But it also has a very forgiving save system.
Yeah. They also have some stuff like it's not always clear when you pick like a choice what's the character like leading that choice,
which was intentional.
Yes. That's what I meant.
Oh, yeah. Sorry. You said it, and I was like...
I know. It sounded like I was piggybacking off the review thing, but I meant they, as in the game developer.
Well, I just say it because, like, somebody mentioned it in a review, and I was like, that's kind of sloppy. And then I read them actually talk about it, and I was like, oh, that's interesting.
Yeah. So. A lot of it reminded me of Kentucky Route Zero.
I gotta get back to that, man.
They don't... there's never really a point in Kentucky Route Zero where you don't know which character you're controlling, but a lot of times you'll have, like, 4 dialogue options, and, like, 2 of them are Conrad, and 1 of them is Shannon, and 1 of them is June, right? And you can pick who's talking in that situation, so you're more playing, like, the whole traveling group together than you are a particular character in that game for a lot of it. And so... that sort of reminded me of this, but taken even like a step farther, where it's really trying to make you feel like you're just sort of guiding these people along the way, but you're not fully like inhabiting any of them as like a psychological thing.
And I think, and you know, they talk about Kentucky Route Zero as an influence, and it's like pretty obvious, right? But I think, and you've talked about this before, of Kentucky Route Zero's perspective is very much like you're the director of this play, right? And so you might be trying to make the like most dramatic choice, or you might have a through line for a particular, you might have decided that Conrad is X way and always X way or something like that. And so it's much of more of this like outside looking down kind of like quote unquote community storytelling. Whereas here I feel like it's much more like they want you to just kind of go with a gut instinct of what's right. Like the it does sort of get around the like, oh, the character didn't say what I thought I was telling them to say.
Yeah.
With their because their dialogue options are like doubt or confidence kind of thing. It's not anything that gives any idea of what the actual dialogue is.
Yeah.
Which on one level I could imagine in a game where you're working more towards a specific ending or something like that could be quite frustrating.
Sure.
But it's not really set up that way. But on the other hand, it is like, oh, okay, I have no idea. I have like such a vague idea that I can't really be disappointed by what comes out.
Yeah. I do think there is still a sense of wanting to create some distance, though. I think they talked about, like, adding the narrator.
Right.
To make it a little bit more, like, setting some space between the player and the crew as well.
Totally. I just think, like, in my 20% of Kentucky Route Zero that I've played, right, it does sort of cast you in a sort of very specific relationship to what's happening. And here, I think it feels a little more I don't know, porous.
Sure.
I also, like, I appreciated, like, Polygon talked about it this way in this review, and this is something that is going to make mashing these two games so interesting, is that, well, like, the politics of it, one, is, like, there's, like, a prison abolition island, right? And there's, like, a climate change island. I mean, the whole thing is, like, a post-climate change, like, some review called it like post-apocalypse, right? It's like they've rebuilt a society after the climate apocalypse here that is quite different, and like more communally minded than ours. But there's one, it's very different from Postal because there's all of these sort of like islands, and I feel like describing them that way, and there were definitely a few reviews that were like, some of these feel a little like too edutainment for me. But like the politics of it is obviously quite different as like your community is your enemy versus the like collectivism here.
Sure.
But also I liked the Polygon review noting, because I feel like we've talked about this a little bit on the show before, but like so much of games is this like colonial looting at all times, even in games where that's like not at all about what you're doing. It's just like in Zelda and Pokemon, whatever, you just like you take the thing from the person's house. Yeah. Right? Like that's what you do. It's a game. Who cares? You smash the pots.
Right.
But this game is like very much about like respect for the cultures that you are entering. Which is interesting. It's not something you see like a lot of, even like games are often so like colonial, just like unintentionally.
Yes.
And this is an interesting outlier.
Yes. You don't really collect stuff in this game.
Stickers.
Yes.
Nothing but stickers.
Nothing but stickers. I also thought it was interesting, there was a whole thing during the development of this game, they did like a climate impact study on themselves.
They're like, no flowers.
Yeah.
No more flowers.
Yeah, we said they're a Danish company, but they're pretty spread across different countries. They're all work from home. So they did just a little climate impact study of like, okay, so during development of this game, what was the sort of, this game that's about a post climate disaster, what was the sort of things that we were doing that were contributing to that? And stuff like, they send their team members flowers on like their birthdays or whatever, because that's something easy to do. They find like every country has a flower shop, essentially. They said, but that based on the climate report, they might have to do a little bit more research of like, okay, is there something else we can do? Like, are we looking closely enough that we're doing local flowers? How much are we flying? How much are we taking trains? Like, is our heaters in our houses really not energy efficient?
Interestingly, the flying, which in many ways, like, must be, like, their biggest contributor, right? In their their discussion of it in an interview, they were sort of like, well, like, we actually really can't do anything about that.
Yeah.
Because we do need to make money.
Yes. That's something more that a collective sort of thing would have to happen.
Yeah.
That they can't do for themselves. But I did also think it was interesting of, like, the guy who did the climate report was talking about, like, Microsoft has, like, a, like, net zero thing that they're trying to meet within a few years. And for example, if you're doing a game on Game Pass, suddenly your emissions are Microsoft's emissions.
Right.
And so that's something that even like indie developers and even bigger developers are actually going to have to be aware of moving forward, or else it may be difficult on Microsoft or on them to make those sorts of partnerships.
It's a budget concern that you don't really currently have to think about at all.
Yes.
I also appreciated something that I thought was interesting, all of the ways, and like, I definitely do this in games all the time. I love numbers go up. But all the ways that they tried to avoid the game ever feeling like a min-maxing experience. Like, they talked about how for a while they were gonna have like a mood system for their crew, right? But they were like, like, it started to feel too much like you were just trying to keep their numbers up at any given time. And so instead, and this was inspired by some kind of like specific tabletop game, they had like an issues system where it just sort of more keeps a record of like, you pissed them off with this.
Yeah.
Right? And that's something you can resolve or not. But it's not like, they're at a 3 out of 4. I also have to mention, because, man, this was the top comment on every single review. And I started to wonder if it was just like one person with a gripe.
Yeah.
But this game's art style, very specific, right? Often talked about in reviews as being a riff on like 50s and 60s, like children's books, but talked about almost exclusively in the comments as being a take on, like, if you've ridden public transit, you've seen it, right? It's a style called corporate Memphis, which is like any tech company ad, color blocky, like sort of woo-woo people. Which, like, now that I've seen it, I can't kind of unsee it, to be honest.
I think the Muta Zion didn't have, like, character portraits. They just had very sort of abstract-looking 3D models that had text boxes, essentially. So it is interesting to see, because it looks like Muta Zion, just like they've zoomed in on that and enhanced some of the details on the faces. But it is interesting to see that sort of style zoomed in on and made into, like, character portraits.
Yeah. They should advertise the game on the subway.
Yeah.
It would fit right in. I'd be like, yes, we work, some kind of, like, CRM ad, and here it is, Saltsea Chronicle.
Yeah.
Well, I didn't, confession, I didn't play out of the games. I did mean to play Saltsea Chronicle, but with Thanksgiving and stuff, this week got away from me.
Yeah.
I might play this one. There's so many games.
I'll probably get around to it. Muta Zion was on my backlog for a really long time, and I ended up liking it quite a bit. So I'm sure I will like this quite a bit, too.
I'll get to it. I don't have a ton of games coming up that I'm going to, like, play on the Switch. So I need a Switch game.
Yeah.
Maybe. Oh, but it's time for the mashup.
Yeah.
Yikes.
This is a really rough one, I think.
They just have such, like, in some ways, things, like, especially if I compare, like, Saltsea Chronicles to Postal 2, right? There are, like, some things that are shared, right? Like, Saltsea Chronicles isn't, like, an open world,
right?
But, like, Postal 2 isn't an open world like we think of now, really, either. So there's this, like, okay, like, you have a task, and you can go about it in some different ways.
Yes, that's unique to these
oh my
two
God,
games.
Stop. You know what I mean?
I know what you mean, but it is very much
like...
you have a task. That's a good way. That's a good place to start for a game. It's good to have a task.
You're right. I mean, unfortunately, I think the only way to do it is, like, some kind of, like... Because, like, you know, there's one way that's, like, oh, like, it's a community game that takes place in Arizona, right? Yeah. Or it's a shoot 'em up in the collectivist post-apocalypse, right? Neither of those are games. Well, like...
There was some sort of tactics game coming out where, like, that there was a trailer for, like, a couple years ago that was, like, there's some people on a raft. You're, like, some people on a raft, and you're going around. Do you have any memory of that?
Not really.
Well, okay.
I believe it, though. But I sort of feel like the direction to go is, like, building on that Postal 2 thing of, like, okay, in theory, you can do this without violence, right? Yeah. Of, like, a really intense, wide, not like morality system exact, but like maybe like sort of like morality system game.
I mean, there's like an art game in there, I guess, of like be a pacifist for as long as you can. Yeah. Sort of thing.
Yeah.
But I don't know if that's like that's more of like a thing you'd exhibit at Games for Change than you know.
Well, no, but I think it's like, okay, it's like pirates, right? Pirates are actually a pretty good basis for a game that's going to have, like, wide-ranging moral choices, right? Because we've got a lot of kind of, like, literary context for, like, there are really evil pirates, and there are, like, good pirates, right? And there are also really evil pirates who can sometimes be good, right? And vice versa. So, like, I think I would create, like, I don't know, like a piracy visual novel where that just gives you the opportunity to get really violent and horrible, basically. Or it gives you the opportunity to be really kind and good.
Yeah. I
don't know, dude.
Like, I feel like we as a society have progressed beyond that kind of morality system now. The, like, Paragon, Renegade, whatever.
I know. But we just have to make it more thoughtfully made.
I guess so.
Right?
Sure.
Like, I'm just going after the, like, okay, Saltsea Chronicles gives you 2 choices all the time. Right?
Sure.
And, like...
But they're not, like, the evil choice and the good choice. No,
they're not the evil choice and the good choice, but I gotta work in Postal here somewhere.
I do feel like both developers would be not very pleased to be mashed up with the other one, to be perfectly honest. Which is part of what makes this difficult.
No, they just have very different... No, it's just, I know I said, like, you go out and you do a task, right? Yeah. But in many ways, both of these games are about sort of, like, how you fit in your community and what you owe your community and what your community owes you.
Sure.
That's a really weird way to talk about Postal, I think it's there.
Sure.
Right? Like, Postal is very much like, you owe your community nothing. Like, you should be laughing at them. Mm-hmm. At the least, you should be laughing at them, and probably you should be committing violence against them. And Saltsea Chronicles is like, no. It's like, no to that. Mm-hmm. So it just makes it challenging especially because, again, like, it's neither of them has especially deep or unique mechanics.
Yeah.
Right? Like, I guess I could make a visual novel that's all about making really violent choices. But I don't know who the market for that is.
Yeah.
Not to, like, you know.
I mean, that would just probably fall into horror, which, like, honestly, that's not really a mashup anymore.
Yeah.
The like, moral choices thing in the movie, which was one quote that was featured in the book that I read, that near the end there is this part where Postal Guy gives, like, this speech of like we can either, you know, hold out our hands to each other, or we can shoot each other. Like, that's our two choices.
Mm-hmm.
And, like, you know, it's the moment where it's like the crowd is like, oh yeah, ba-bang! Which maybe that's the sort of thing, the sort of tone we would want to settle on. This isn't a very, I feel like no matter what we do, this isn't a very good game,
Okay,
but in terms of making a mashup.
Like, I'm going in a bold direction here. So if you think about it, Postal takes place, most of these games, immediately pre-apocalypse. Right? Now, they retcon that, right? But, like, Postal 2, if you just play Postal 2, appears to take place right before some kind of apocalypse.
Yeah.
And Saltsea Chronicles takes place, like, post-apocalypse. Right? Like, we've already built the society. There's still problems, but it's working pretty well, sort of thing. So what if we made a visual novel adventure game that is more immediately post-climate apocalypse? And this is not an obvious mashup of either of these games, to be clear. But, like, you have to make choices as part of the ruling body, right, that are going to influence what kind of society that you ultimately build. Yeah, whatever, man.
Shrugging. For the listener, that's, you know, there's something there. People like management games. Yeah. You know, I don't know. I don't think we're gonna settle on one where I'm like, oh yeah, that's a perfect mashup and also a good game.
How about we do one where what we're actually shooting out is resources?
Right.
And we're deciding where we're shooting the resources.
Yeah.
Resource them up.
Yeah.
Well, listeners, do you have a better way to mash up two games that have totally contradictory, like, perspectives on our world and what we owe to one another? Have you played Postal? Did we give it a fair shake here? Is there some? Have you watched the movie? Should we watch the movie? Should it be split screen?
Probably not.
Should I bump Saltsea Chronicles higher up on my playlist? There's so many games. Mm-hmm. I have to play so many games before the end of the year to catch up to your total. If you have thoughts on any of this or anything else we talked about this week, hit us up on social media. We are on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube at Talk This Podcast. You can also visit our website, www.talkthispodcast.com, where you can read all about the show, check out the games in the hat, and read our blog featuring a long-running series, Clickbait Boyfriend, and Split Screen, where we probably won't be watching Postal, sorry. A lot of you would have to write in.
Yeah.
But most importantly, if you enjoy the show, you should subscribe. We're on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, as long as that is a thing, TuneIn, Spotify, Pandora Podcasts, online and on the app, Overcast, Pocket Casts, wherever you can find podcasts. Listen to Talk This. I've, like, totally lost track of where we are in the cycle. It's your side quest.
It's my side
next
quest.
week.
Yep.
What's it gonna be?
We'll see.
Holiday gift guide.
Maybe.
More about the Postal movie.
Emma, you gotta do your Christmas shopping. The side quest.
Nice.
Where I just repeat to myself.
Emma, you gotta do your Christmas shopping. But what are we gonna be talking about in 2 weeks?
In 2 weeks, for our old game, we will be talking about Advance Wars.
Cool.
And for our new game, we will be talking about Lords of the Fallen.
Lord of the Flies. Got it.
Not Lord of the Flies.
Lord of the Flies. I thought that was pretty old.
Not Lord of the Flies.
Well, look forward to that in, what is that, in mid-December? Yikes.
Yeah.
Emma, buy your holiday gifts.
I will.
But listeners, thanks for tuning in. Emma, do you have a side quest that adequately walks the line?
A side quest?
I'm sorry, a side quest. Do you have a sign-off that adequately walks the line between these two games? Captures the spirit of both in one pithy sentence?
You know, this week, I hope that you and your local postal workers just get along just fine.